So welcome to the second of our process learning videos over the period September 2020 to March 2021. In this video, we're going to explore what we mean by and what we're learning about involving local people and growing assets. So just as a brief recap for anybody new to GM Moving, that when we talk about progress to enable active lives, we talk about some of the underlying conditions that might support that, and involving local people and growing assets is one of those conditions. What we had learnt up till September 2020 was that involving local people in the work would help to ensure local ownership and effective communication about physical activity between people in the local area, and that would in turn lead to more appropriate investments and or shifts in local culture, which would enable people to be more active. But we had identified that first 6 months of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated movement restrictions actually challenged many of the locality teams to stay connected with local people and uphold this principle. It was something which local teams were really consciously trying to change. So now we've flipped forward to 2021 and our learnings for this March update. And essentially what we report is continued challenges with trying to reach local people, and that is taking dedicated capacity with paid roles in officer roles and their ingenuity to work with local forums and local people where they are, and also just persistence to really keep on with building those relationships and involving local people. And in many places, particularly where locality teams are substantively in local authority roles, they're really finding it difficult to build or sustain meaningful relationships and community involvement in the work. Having said that, concurrently, there is some engagement activity run by those associated with Greater Manchester Moving on the strategy refresh, and that's actually unearthing a great deal of community passion and enthusiasm for activity as something, one of the only positives to arise from the pandemic, the kind of renewed focus on physical activity. And so we identified that in essence the people are there, it's just a question of how do locality teams connect with them more effectively, and really questioning the structures and the processes that local authority teams in particular seem to be bounded by, which may stop them from working more closely with communities in a more embedded fashion. We also want to report on the work going on with community investment funds in place. Now, these were designed in order to distribute funds to local communities to build and nurture assets that are in place, and to provide some opportunities to build trusting relationships between the local authorities and other bodies in the area and local people. Actually, what we've seen in response to the COVID crisis is a plethora of small grants opportunities from a range of bodies. And this is having the impact, along with some of the complicated application processes, of in fact making the small grants market more complex and difficult to navigate for local people. And that's having the impact of really just the usual suspects. People who are already good at achieving funding, receiving more. Where we are seeing some really beneficial work is where there's co-commissioning between the local pilots and a number of other institutions, and combining this work with developmental work to support small local businesses and social enterprises to grow. But these process learnings and our collective sense-making sessions are causing us to really question whether this action alone is enough to really turn the tables and build local ownership and capacity for physical activity solutions. And so we introduced now a potentially more radical solution, which is around facilitating community leadership. Now, I stress that these are ideas born out of the results as opposed to what's really happening on the ground. But essentially, they suggest that if we really want to make a change, how do we actually unlock the power and the money and the resources within a place and that are for local people? How do we build influence from local people into decision making, perhaps by including them as board members? What would that lead to? Perhaps it would lead to increased participation, democratic engagement, and new relationships with institutions and professionals with local people. And why would this be a way of actually tackling inactivity? Because we have seen in pockets that local people's voice, carry weight and energy, are more effective at mobilising other community members, and that there's more likely to be a sustainable impact if local people define the possibilities for themselves, not just in their place, but also in other areas of decision-making responsibility. So this leads us to conclude in terms of 2 potential strategies going forward. In terms of the place-based approach, involving local people and growing assets, throwing more effort into more substantive relationships there, but also to consider how might we actually start to tackle the inequalities associated with inactivity and beyond. And that's where we might think about the work being led by local people, not just involving them. So this concludes our process learnings and recommendations moving forward with regards involving local people and growing assets. One of the enablers of change to tackle inactivity in Greater Manchester.